In August of 1943, at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, an American test officer stood beside an unusual vehicle, low, squat, with a long gun barrel. In his hands was a report from North Africa about the German self-propelled gun. Height 2 meters 16 centimeters. Frontal armor 80 millimeters. In a single engagement, it destroyed 11 American Shermans without a single hit on the hull. The officer studied the vehicle and couldn't understand why it was so effective. Its armor was no thicker than a Sherman's. Its engine was weaker. There was no turret. Yet the figures told a different story. It destroyed American tanks at a 5-1 ratio. This was the StuG III Sturmgeschütz, an assault gun never designed for tank battles but for infantry support. This machine became the most effective tank killer for the German Wehrmacht and forced the US Army to revise its tactical manuals. The lesson was clear. Sometimes being invisible is more effective than being invulnerable. While German tanks like the Tigers and Panthers were heavily armored and loud, the statistics show that most enemy vehicles were destroyed by a turretless vehicle with a crew of 4 and a frontal plate of just 50 millimeters. The StuG III, based on the Panzer III chassis, was conceived in 1940 with a simple mission: follow the infantry and suppress enemy fire points. Its low silhouette, gun-mounted in a fixed casemate, and relatively cheap production made it ideal. By the war's end, Germany produced more than 12,000 of these vehicles, compared to 1,347 Tigers and 6,000 Panthers. The StuG III became the backbone of the German anti-tank units. According to German records, these vehicles destroyed over 20,000 Allied tanks, with some estimates reaching 30,000. The US first encountered the StuG III in Tunisia in 1943 and quickly realized it posed a greater threat than the Tiger. The Tiger was visible from a distance, while the StuG III was only seen at the moment it fired. In 1943, a captured StuG III was sent to the US, where trials at Aberdeen lasted until 1944. The engineer's final report reshaped US Army anti-tank tactics. This is the story of how a simple infantry support gun became a tanker's worst nightmare, and why the most dangerous enemy is the one you can't see. In 1936, General Erich von Stein submitted a memo to the German Army, highlighting the need for an armored vehicle to accompany infantry, different from a tank. Tanks were meant for breakthroughs, but what was needed was a mobile gun to support infantry by destroying bunkers, pillboxes, and machine gun nests. The design called for a low profile to make the vehicle harder to spot, a powerful gun to break concrete, and strong frontal armor to withstand defensive fire. The rest was secondary. In 1937, Daimler-Benz received the order to build it, using the chassis from the Panzer III tank, which was ready for production. The turret was removed and replaced with a low casemate housing the gun. The vehicle's height was 1.95 meters, about 40 centimeters shorter than the Panzer III. The first 5 prototypes were ready in 1940, armed with a 75mm short-barreled StuG 47 L24 for high-explosive rounds, with a 50mm thick front hull and 30mm sides. Powered by a Maybach HL120 engine with 300 horsepower, it could reach a maximum speed of 40 km/h. The crew consisted of 4, a commander, gunner, loader, and driver. Initially, it lacked a radio, which was later added. The unit cost was about a third of a tank. Initially, troops were skeptical. A gun without a turret? But by May 1940, during the French campaign, the first assault gun batteries proved their worth. They accompanied the infantry, breaking through the Maginot Line's bunkers and ambushing French tanks. The StuG's low profile allowed it to hide behind ridgelines, buildings and trees, making it difficult for French crews to spot it before it fired. By the end of 1940, 184 vehicles had been built, and they were organized into assault gun battalions, each assigned to an infantry division. Manstein was pleased, having received mobile artillery for direct infantry support. though he had yet to realize he was witnessing the birth of one of the most efficient tank hunters in modern history. War, however, would soon change everything, including the vehicle itself. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began, and StuG battalions moved behind German infantry into the Soviet Union. The early weeks were successful, as Soviet light tanks were easily destroyed by the short 75mm guns, even penetrating heavier KV-1 tanks when hitting the side. But by July, troubling reports arrived. In western Ukraine near Senyo, a unit encountered an unknown medium tank with sloped armor and a long 76mm gun. Its speed was about 50 km/h, and its glacis had 45mm of armor at a steep angle. It was the T-34, the Soviet Union's first real challenge. The short-barreled 75mm guns of the StuGs couldn't penetrate the T-34's front beyond 300 meters. Meanwhile, the T-34's 76mm gun easily penetrated the StuG III from 800 meters away. By August 1941, Colonel Becker wrote in his report that a longer gun was needed. The solution came quickly. By the end of the year, the short-barreled StuG 47 L-24 was replaced with the long-barreled StuG 40 L-43. The new gun had a 43 caliber barrel, with a muzzle velocity of 740 meters per second, more than double that of the L-24. At 500 meters, the new gun could penetrate 91 mm of armor, enabling the StuG III to engage the T-34 head-on. The Germans noted an interesting paradox. In an anti-tank duel, a low silhouette often proved more important than having a turret. When both vehicles were hidden behind a crest, the StuG could only see the opponent's turret, and that was enough to aim. On the other hand, the T-34 often saw nothing. In the summer of 1942, the StuG III-F arrived, equipped with a frontal plate of 80mm and a longer 75mm StuG 40 L-48 gun. At 500 meters, it could penetrate over 106mm of armor. The StuG was now a full-fledged tank destroyer. Tactics evolved. StuG battalions stopped trailing the infantry and began operating as mobile anti-tank defense units. They would occupy concealed positions, wait for enemy tank assaults, and strike from ambush. The effect was devastating. In autumn 1942, near Rams, one StuG battalion destroyed 54 Soviet tanks in a month, while losing only 3 of its own, an 18.1 kill ratio. Soviet crews did not fear the Tigers, as there were too few of them, but they dreaded the low silhouettes of the StuGs, which appeared out of nowhere, leaving burning T-34s in their wake. Berlin was already banking on mass production. For the cost of one Tiger, 3 StuGs could be assembled, and the return on investment was often higher. However, the StuG still faced its hardest test: North Africa in February 1943, Tunisia. The German 10th Panzer Division received reinforcements in the form of a StuG III-G. The latest modification had 80mm of frontal armor, the same StuG 40 L-48 gun, and reinforced side plates. Major Hans Rohr, the battalion commander, understood that in the desert their advantage would be undeniable. In the desert, there were no forests to hide a tall tank, only dunes, hollows, and dry riverbeds. And in these features, the StuG, standing at 2 meters 16 centimeters, would be almost invisible. On February 14th, the 1st U.S. Armored Regiment, with 52 M4 Sherman tanks, advanced to attack German positions. They didn't know that behind a sandcrest, a battery of 6 StuGs was waiting. The range was approximately 900 meters. The Shermans advanced in line, almost like a parade. A Sherman's height was 2 meters 74 centimeters, and above the crest, its turret and upper hull were fully exposed. The first shot hit and one Sherman froze, smoke billowing from its turret. A second shot, then a third. Within 2 minutes, 4 Shermans were burning. The rest tried to retreat, but the StuGs crested the hill, flanked them and hit them from the side. In just 20 minutes, the Americans lost 11 tanks, while the StuGs only took 2 hits, both of which ricocheted. No losses. After the battle, Colonel Thomas Drake, the regimental commander, commented, "We did not see the enemy until he opened fire. The German vehicles had the most effective camouflage I have ever encountered. They vanished on level ground. But it wasn't paint or camouflage, it was geometry. The difference in silhouette was decisive. The low StuG presented a smaller visible area, allowing it to be detected later. The taller turreted Sherman exposed itself sooner, and in the desert, the first shot could decide the battle. That was a death sentence. In March 1943, near El Guetar, the Americans captured their first intact StuG. The vehicle was recovered and examined. The intelligence report described it as low, broad, and difficult to detect. Its front armor withstood 75mm rounds at 600 yards. The report recommended flanking attacks or the use of aircraft. However, the main point in the document was elsewhere. The vehicle was designed for infantry support, but it is being used as a tank destroyer. In this role, it is the most effective German armored vehicle we've encountered. In April, during the turning point of the North African campaign, the Germans began retreating. During the withdrawal, one crew attempted to destroy their StuG, but the charge was insufficient. The running gear was damaged, but the armor and gun remained intact. This presented an opportunity. The vehicle was disassembled, crated, and shipped to the United States. By July 1943, the StuG III arrived at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, and American engineers began to understand why the low vehicle was so effective and why their Shermans were so vulnerable. In August 1943, the captured StuG III sat in Hangar No. 7, surrounded by a ring of engineers, officers, and tankers, all studying the machine that had claimed so many American lives. The first thing they noticed was its size, length with the gun mounted, 6 meters 77 centimeters, width 2 meters 95 centimeters, and height 2 meters 16 centimeters. For comparison, the M4A1 Sherman stood 2 meters 74 centimeters tall. The difference was 58 centimeters, roughly 2 feet, or the height of a person's belt above the ground. Captain James McIntyre, chief test engineer, noted, "Under identical terrain conditions, this vehicle is detected 25 to 30% later than our medium tank. In hilly or urban terrain, it's detected 40 to 50% later." Next, they examined the armor layout. The StuG's front was 80mm thick and sloped at 10 degrees, equivalent to about 81mm of vertical armor. In contrast, the Sherman's glacis was 51mm thick at a 56-degree angle, giving about 76 meters of vertical thickness. At first glance, the difference seemed minor, but the advantage lay in the size of the vulnerable frontal target. The StuG had no turret or turret ring, which was a traditionally weak spot. It also lacked a commander's cupola, another aiming point eliminated. There was only a low, sloped hull and a casemate with the gun. The frontal projected area of the StuG was about 4.2 square meters, while the Sherman's was 5.8 square meters. The difference was about 38%. This meant that to hit a StuG from the same range, you had to aim about 1/3 more precisely. As for the armament, the StuG III was equipped with the 75mm StuK 40 L48. Its barrel length was 3 meters 55 centimeters, and the armor-piercing PZGR 39 shell left the muzzle at 750 meters per second and weighed 6.8 kilograms. The engineers began live-fire trials against armor plates, targeting a 75mm plate at a 30 degrees angle, similar to the Sherman glacis. The first shot penetrated completely, as did the second and third. At 500 meters, the StuK 40 consistently pierced the equivalent of about 96mm of vertical armor. By comparison, the Sherman 75mm M3 confidently defeats about 68 meters of armor at this distance. The conclusion is simple. The StuG sees the Sherman earlier and lands the first shot at a range where the Sherman is already near the limits of its effective response. McIntyre sums up the findings. The primary advantage is not the armor itself. The advantage is the silhouette. A reduced height shortens the enemy's reaction time in a tank fight, which can be decisive. Then comes the most interesting part. The Americans decide not only to measure and shoot at plates, but also stage a mock battle, StuG III versus Sherman. In September 1943, at the Aberdeen training field, conditions were set up to simulate northern Italy. The rolling hills, embankments, and shallow depressions approximated the terrain. Experimental conditions, one StuG III versus one M4 Sherman. Both vehicles were without combat loads and fired training rounds marked with red paint. The StuG's task was to take up a defensive position, wait for the Sherman to appear, and open fire first. The Sherman's task was to detect the StuG, gain a favorable position, and score a notional kill. In the first round, the StuG lay behind a 3-meter crest, exposing only the gun mantlet and the top 30 centimeters of the casemate. The Sherman advanced cautiously at around 800 meters, not knowing the StuG's exact position. Lieutenant Robert Clark, the Sherman commander, recalls, "We knew the StuG was somewhere ahead, but we could not see it. I scanned the ground with binoculars. Nothing. The moment we crested and showed our nose, there was a shot. A red splash on the armor. We were downed. Time from the Sherman entering the sector to the StuG's shot, about 4 seconds. The Sherman didn't even manage to fully traverse its turret. In the second round, the Sherman knew the StuG's approximate location and moved cautiously, stopping and observing. The StuG shifted position, taking cover behind a rail embankment and trees. The result was the same. The StuG was detected the moment it fired. StuG reaction time about 6 seconds. Sherman reaction about 11 seconds. In the third round, 2 Shermans attacked from different angles. The StuG occupied a hollow between 2 hills and maneuvered. After the first hit on the lead Sherman, it displaced 20 meters and hid behind a second crest. The first Sherman was notional killed, and as the second one turned to respond, the StuG was already in a new firing position. Another 8 seconds later, the second Sherman was marked as hit. By the end of the day, the score was 12 hits. The StuG was detected first only twice, while the Sherman was detected 10 times. However, the first hit landed on the StuG once, while the Sherman was hit 11 times. McIntyre recorded the findings. A low-profile vehicle in defense has a critical advantage. It reads the ground better and shortens the time from detection to shot. Effective counters. Numerical superiority, flanking, artillery preparation, or air support. There was one more block of tests, mobility. After all, the StuG was not designed solely for static defense, but as an infantry support gun. And here, the Germans' foresight proved superior. In October 1943, engineers at the Proving Ground's machine shop tore down the captured StuG's power unit. The Maybach HLN-20 TRM, 12-cylinder V-configured carburetor, had a displacement of 11.87 liters and output 300 horsepower at 3,000 RPM. In comparison, the M4A1 Sherman mounted the Continental R975 engine with roughly 400 horsepower. On paper, the advantage went to the Americans, but the power-to-weight ratio narrowed the gap. The StuG III weighed 23.9 tons, giving it approximately 12.51 horsepower per ton, while the Sherman weighed 30.3 tons and had 13.2 horsepower per ton. The difference was minimal. Next, the transmission. The StuG used the Maybach Variore X 10-speed gearbox with 6 forward gears and 4 reverse. The turning mechanism was a lockable differential. The key to comfort lay in control. The driver used a steering wheel, much like in a truck, as opposed to the old steering levers. Engineer Michael Stevens wrote after road trials, "The handling is intuitive. If you've driven a car, you'll quickly master the StuG. Smooth turns even at speed, which explains why the Germans can hop between firing points so quickly. Maximum speed on road, about 40 km/h. Cross-country, approximately 20 km/h. Cruising range, roughly 155 kilometers. The Sherman held the edge here, but the StuG was more compact. Its length without the gun was 5.52 meters, while the Sherman's length was 5.89 meters. The StuG's turning radius was 5.92 meters compared to the Sherman's 7.62 meters. In narrow European streets, that made a decisive difference. Maintainability was another advantage. After teardown, the verdict was surprising. The Maybach power plant was easier to service than the Continental. Fewer small parts, greater standardization. Engine replacement in the StuG took about 4 hours of crew work with a hoist, while in the Sherman it took about 6. Track replacement? Around 2 hours for the StuG, 3.5 hours for the Sherman. The transmission could be accessed through the rear hatch without removing the engine. Stevens concluded, "This is not a work of art, but a smart compromise between effectiveness and simplicity, built for mass production and quick field repair." The chief discovery, however, lay in weight distribution and its effect on mobility. In November 1943, the StuG faced a stretch of difficult terrain, swamps, sandy climbs, and stony terraces. The StuG, in its element, proved the Germans' foresight to be more than just luck. The Sherman tackles the same route, testing real mobility under real conditions. The first section is a boggy lowland, where ground pressure plays a crucial role. The lower the pressure, the better the vehicle's mobility. The StuG III has a track width of 400 mm and a ground contact length of 3 meters 68 centimeters with a mass of 23.9 tons. Its calculated ground pressure is approximately 0.89 kilo per square centimeters. The M4A1 Sherman, with a track width of 421 mm and a contact length of 3 meters 91 centimeters, weighs 30.3 tons. Its ground pressure is about 0.94 kilos per square centimeters. While the difference is small, it is noticeable. The StuG moves more confidently, while the Sherman bogs down 3 times and requires logs under its tracks. The second section, a sandy slope with a 20 degrees incline, reveals the StuG's stability. Its center of mass is lower by about 35 centimeters, providing more stability on inclines. The turreted Sherman sways on the climb, requiring the driver to move more slowly. The StuG goes up smoothly without rocking. Major George Hope, the tank battalion commander observing the test, comments, "Their vehicle is more stable. A low center of gravity makes it safer on slopes and during abrupt maneuvers. Our Shermans sometimes roll over on sharp turns. It is unlikely with the StuG." The third section is a rocky ascent, testing suspension. The StuG uses a torsion bar system with 6 large road wheels per side, while the Sherman has a vertical volute spring suspension, VVSS, with 3 bogies per side. The StuG moves at about 15 km/h over the rocks without jolting, while the Sherman must slow to about 8 km/h, or the crew feels every stone. After the run, Sergeant William Jones, the Sherman's driver, remarks, "Ours is more comfortable. After an hour of shaking, we come out bruised. The Germans are calm." Next, a durability marathon. Both vehicles cover 100 meters of cross-country terrain. The StuG completes the course without failures, but the Sherman shows 2 weak points: accelerated wear of the rubber tires and a crack on a suspension bracket. Stevens concludes, "The German suspension is more modern. Torsion bars are more reliable than springs, and large wheels wear more slowly. The downside is that repairs are more complex, but the chance of torsion bar failure in the field is lower than spring failure." Overall, the StuG is not faster than the Sherman, but it is steadier, more comfortable for the crew, and more reliable in harsh conditions. It is logical. The Germans designed it for the European theatre, with narrow roads, wet forests, and steep slopes in mind, while the Americans built the Sherman for mass production and ease of shipment by sea. The Germans designed the StuG for survival and quick repairs in the field, meaning that to defeat it, the Americans would need more than just adding more tanks. In December 1943, an unusual experiment took place at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. American tankers spent 6 hours inside the StuG to learn how workable a turretless fighting compartment could be. Lieutenant Robert Clark, the same officer who lost all the duels at the Proving Ground, entered through the hatch in the casemate roof. Inside it was cramped, but not as much as he expected. The fighting compartment was 1.9 meters long, 1.7 meters wide, and 1.65 meters high, just enough to stand with a slight bend. For comparison, the Sherman's turret is roughly 1.75 meters tall and 1.75 meters in diameter. The Sherman offers more volume, but it's distributed differently. In the Sherman, the commander and gunner sit in the turret, the loader stands, and the driver and radio operator are in the hull, 5 men in 3 compartments. In the StuG, everyone shares one compartment. The driver sits front left, the radio operator front right, the commander and gunner near the gun, and the loader behind them. Clark sits in the commander's seat. The StuG has 4 SLZ-F1 periscopes around the casemate, providing all-round vision, but it's less convenient than the Sherman's commander's cupola, where you can simply swivel and see everything. In the StuG, you switch between periscopes. One advantage is clear. The commander's head sits 20 centimeters lower than the roofline, so when a round hits the front, fragments fly overhead rather than into his face. The gunner's seat is to the left of the gun. In front of him is the SLZ-F1, a telescopic sight with 5x magnification and an 8-degree field of view. In comparison, the Sherman's M38 sight has 6x magnification and a 13-degree field of view, which seems to favor the Americans. However, the StuG's gunner immediately notices something else. The laying gear works more smoothly. The gun is rigidly mounted in the hull, eliminating turret wobble, making firing on the move steadier. The loader stands behind the gun, and the ammunition stowage holds 54 rounds, 44 in the hull and 10 in the casemate, with racks along the sides. The standard reload cycle is about 6 seconds, compared to about 8 seconds in the Sherman with a 75mm gun. The difference is simple. The StuG loader doesn't need to chase the turret angle and walk in a circle. After 3 hours, Clark steps outside, noting, "It's cramped, stuffy and noisy, but functionally smart. Everyone is where they should be. No need to shout over the engine. Everyone is close. The commander sees everyone. Everyone sees the commander. In the Sherman, I'm in the turret, the driver is in the hull. Between us, a meter of armor and an engine. Here we're together." Next, they simulate a hit-and-fire scenario to test the crew's evacuation speed. The team must exit as quickly as possible after the hit, but the tight layout proves a benefit in an emergency. The Sherman tackles the same route, testing real mobility under real conditions. The first section is a boggy lowland, where ground pressure is key. The lower the pressure, the better the vehicle's mobility. The StuG III has a track width of 400 mm, a ground contact length of 3 meters 68 centimeters, and weighs 23.9 tons. Its calculated ground pressure is approximately 0.89 kilograms per square cm. In contrast, the M4A1 Sherman has a track width of 421 mm, a contact length of 3 meters 91 centimeters, and weighs 30.3 tons, with a ground pressure of 0.94 kilograms per square centimeter. While the difference is small, it's noticeable. The StuG moves more confidently, while the Sherman bogs down 3 times and requires logs under its tracks. The second section, a sandy slope with a 20 degrees incline, reveals the StuG's stability. Its center of mass is lower by about 35 centimeters, providing more stability on inclines. The Sherman, with its turret, sways on the climb, and requires the driver to proceed more slowly. The StuG climbs smoothly without rocking. Major George Hope, the tank battalion commander observing the test, remarks, "Their vehicle is more stable. A low center of gravity makes it safer on slopes and during sharp maneuvers. Our Shermans sometimes roll over on sharp turns. It's unlikely with the StuG." The third section tests suspension on a rocky ascent. The StuG uses a torsion bar system with 6 large road wheels per side, while the Sherman uses vertical volute spring suspension, VVSS, with 3 bogies per side. The StuG moves at about 15 km/h over rocks without jolting, while the Sherman has to slow down to about 8 km/h or risk feeling every stone. After the run, Sergeant William Jones, the Sherman's driver, comments, "Ours is more comfortable. After an hour of shaking, we come out bruised. The Germans are calm." Next comes a durability marathon, where both vehicles cover 100 meters of cross-country terrain. The StuG finishes without failure, but the Sherman shows 2 weak points: accelerated wear on the rubber tires and a crack on the suspension bracket. Stevens concludes, "The German suspension is more modern. Torsion bars are more reliable than springs, and large wheels wear more slowly. The downside is that repairs are more complex, but torsion bar failure in the field is less likely than spring failure." Overall, the StuG is not faster than the Sherman, but it's steadier, more comfortable for the crew, and more reliable in harsh conditions. It makes sense. The Germans designed it for the European theatre, with narrow roads, wet forests, and steep slopes in mind. The Americans built the Sherman for mass production and ease of shipment by sea. The Germans designed the StuG for survival and quick repairs in the field, meaning the Americans would need more than just more tanks to defeat it. In December 1943, an unusual experiment took place at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. American tankers spent 6 hours inside the StuG to learn how workable a turretless fighting compartment could be. Lieutenant Robert Clark, the officer who had lost all the duels at the Proving Ground, entered through the hatch in the casement roof. Inside, it was cramped but not as bad as expected. The fighting compartment measured 1.9 meters long, 1.7 meters wide, and 1.65 meters high, just enough to stand slightly bent. In comparison, the Sherman's turret is 1.75 meters tall and 1.75 meters in diameter. The Sherman offers more volume, but it's distributed differently. In the Sherman, the commander and gunner sit in the turret, the loader stands, and the driver and radio operator are in the hull, 5 men in 3 compartments. In the StuG, everyone shares one compartment. The driver is front left, the radio operator front right, the commander and gunner by the gun, and the loader behind them. Clark sits in the commander's seat. The StuG has 4 SLZ F1 periscopes, offering all-around vision, but it's less convenient than the Sherman's commander's cupola, where you simply swivel and see everything. In the StuG, you switch between periscopes. One advantage is clear. The commander's head sits 20 centimeters lower than the roofline, so when a round hits the front, fragments fly over his head rather than into his face. The gunner sits to the left of the gun, and in front of him is the SLZF-1 telescopic sight, offering 5x magnification and an 8-to-ground field of view. By comparison, the Sherman's M38 sight has 6x magnification and a 13-to-ground field of view. This seems to favor the Americans, but the StuG's gunner immediately notices the smoother laying gear. The gun is rigidly mounted in the hull, eliminating turret wobble, which makes firing on the move steadier. The loader stands behind the gun. Ammunition stowage holds 54 rounds, 44 in the hull and 10 in the casemate with racks along the sides. The standard reload cycle is about 6 seconds, compared to the Sherman's 8 seconds with a 75mm gun. The difference is simple. The StuG loader doesn't have to chase the turret angle and walk in circles. After 3 hours, Clark steps outside, noting, "It's cramped, stuffy and noisy, but functionally smart. Everyone is where they should be. No need to shout over the engine. Everyone is close. The commander sees everyone. Everyone sees the commander. In the Sherman, I'm in the turret. The driver's in the hull. Between us is a meter of armor and an engine. Here, we're together. They then test evacuation by simulating a hit-and-fire scenario. The crew must exit as quickly as possible after the hit, and the compact layout proves beneficial in an emergency. The advantage is clear: silhouette and visibility. The StuG III is lower than the Sherman by roughly 22 inches. Its frontal projected area is about 38% smaller. When viewed through a periscope at 1,000 yards, the StuG occupies roughly 1/3 less of the field of view. Target detection time increases by 25 to 40%, depending on the terrain. McIntyre concludes in bold letters, a low silhouette is the vehicle's primary advantage. Then comes the psychological effect. American tankers fear the StuG more than the Tigers. A Tiger is visible from a distance. You can skirt it, call in air support or retreat. But a StuG remains unseen until it fires, and that triggers panic. There is a recorded statement from a tanker who survived in El Guetar. We were driving down the road. Suddenly a shot. The lead tank burst into flames. I looked around, nothing, only smoke. A second shot. The tank behind us. I ordered a turnabout and tried to run. We didn't know where the enemy was. The tactical recommendations in the report span about 40 pages. In essence, they advise never to advance frontally without artillery preparation or smoke, and to use reconnaissance, infantry, aircraft, and light tanks to locate concealed positions. Upon detection, attack from multiple directions simultaneously. A turretless vehicle shifts fire more slowly, making it a prime target for aviation. Its top armor is thin, about 16 millimeters, so in defense, the recommendation is to create your own anti-tank ambushes, similar to how the Germans use the StuG. The final design lessons note the need to develop a low-profile, turretless, self-propelled gun for anti-tank defense. They recommend considering torsion bar suspension for new tanks, increasing gun power to 76 mm, and improving crew training, focusing less on heroics and more on tactics. All members of the board sign the report. On March 15, 1944, the report is delivered to the War Department. 3 months remain until Normandy. The question is, will the Americans change their approach in time? Will they heed the StuG's lesson? France will provide the answer. Even in February, it's clear the Germans have created a machine that changed the rules of the game. It can be beaten by numbers, aircraft, and brains. The captured StuG that helped reveal this will remain at the Aberdeen Proving Ground until the end of the war, and later be transferred to a museum. Beneath the placard, German assault gun StuG III, 1943, it will serve as a reminder, sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is the one you can't see. On June 6, 1944, today, American forces land on the coast of Normandy. M4 Sherman tanks roll ashore and push into French territory. The commanders have read the StuG report. They know about the low silhouette, the ambush tactics, and the lethality of the 75mm gun. But knowing in theory is not the same as encountering it in real combat. On June 10th, near Carentan, about 15 kilometers from the coast, a company of Shermans from the 2nd Armored Division moves along a narrow hedgerow lane. Dense walls of brush and trees turn Normandy into a green trap. The company commander, Captain David Cole, remembers the warning, StuGs hunt in the bocage. The hedges are 3 to 4 meters high. You're a Sherman, 274 meters. The German vehicle is 2.16 meters. The StuGs hide behind the green wall, and the Sherman sticks out above it. Cole orders a slow advance with reconnaissance, but the bocage restricts maneuver. There is only one lane, with impenetrable growth to the left and right. 300 meters to the crossroads, a sudden shot. The lead Sherman locks up, black smoke pouring from the turret. Cole shouts into the radio, "Where's the enemy?" No one sees them. A second shot hits the second tank, knocking it out. The column is trapped. A third Sherman tries to pass the wreck, but runs into a mine. A fourth shot, a fifth. In just 3 minutes, the company loses 4 tanks. The enemy remains invisible. Later, the infantry finds the position behind the hedge, roughly 200 meters off the road. 3 StuGs are lined up, covered with branches and nets, firing in rotation, first, second, third, then first again. After 5 shots, all 3 withdraw into the woods. The Americans call for artillery, but by the time it lands, the Germans are gone. Cole writes in his report, "The Aberdeen report is accurate. We didn't see them. They saw us perfectly. The bocage is ideal ground for this vehicle. I recommend aerial reconnaissance before every advance," he adds. But aircraft are scarce. June 1944 proves to be the hardest month for the Allies in Normandy. The Germans deploy StuGs widely. Each infantry division fields an assault gun battalion. The StuGs don't storm. They wait and destroy. In the first 2 weeks after the landing, the Americans lose 221 tanks, while the Germans lose 47 tanks and 31 StuGs. The ratio is close to 5.1. Similar to Tunisia, General Omar Bradley calls Dwight Eisenhower's headquarters, reporting that German turretless self-propelled guns are causing unacceptable losses. "We need more heavy tanks, more aircraft, more time for reconnaissance, or we'll be stuck here until autumn." Gradually, the Americans learn and change tactics. They stop driving in road columns, send infantry ahead to clear the bocage, and call artillery at the slightest hint of an ambush. They also deploy more air power. The P-47 Thunderbolt, armed with rockets and bombs, becomes the StuG's primary nemesis. Its top armor, about 16 mm, can't withstand even heavy machine gun fire. One aircraft can destroy more StuGs in a day than 10 tanks can in a week. By the end of July, the balance begins to shift, but the price is high. In Normandy alone, the Americans lose over 500 tanks, roughly 1/3 of which are to StuG fire. The principal lesson learned is clear. The StuG is a formidable opponent that requires a tactical shift to counter effectively. The Americans carry away a valuable lesson. Technology does not decide a war, tactics do. The StuG was not the Wehrmacht's strongest vehicle, but it was the most intelligently employed. By the spring of 1945, as the war neared its end, the Allies tallied their losses and trophies, stumbling upon something odd. German statistics didn't match the Allied records. According to the Germans, StuG crews had destroyed more than 20,000 Allied tanks, with some sources even claiming 30,000. The most famous ace, Oberleutnant Michael Wittmann, the Tiger ace who had started with a StuG, is said to have 117 confirmed kills. However, Allied archives paint a different picture. The combined tank losses of the Red Army, the United States, Great Britain, and Canada from 1941 to 1945 amounted to about 85,000 vehicles, with StuGs accounting for at most 15,000. So where is the truth? Captain James McIntyre, who later served on a board verifying German claims, dug through the files and found the explanation. First, the Germans often counted not only destroyed, but also disabled tanks. A vehicle that halted and burned, but was later recovered and repaired, would be logged as destroyed by the Germans, but not by the Allies. Second, in the chaos of battle, the same target could be claimed twice. 2 crews could fire at the same target, both recording hits. At the battalion level, the report might show 2 victories, even though only 1 tank was actually lost. Third, propaganda played a role. As the war turned against Germany, heroes were needed. StuG crews were lauded as Panzerjäger, and figures were amplified to boost morale. McIntyre concludes in his final report that a realistic figure for tanks destroyed by StuGs is between 12,000 and 18,000. Still, this is impressive. Over 5 years of war, 10 to 500 StuGs knocked out at least 12,000 enemy vehicles, a ratio better than 1.1. For comparison, American Shermans destroyed around 6,000 German tanks and assault guns, but lost over 8,000 of their own. But statistics are just numbers. Behind them are the people. American tankers who burned in Shermans, German StuG crews who died under bombs, and Soviet soldiers who torched StuGs with Molotov cocktails or struck them with anti-tank rifles. One document from the captured archives of the 21st Assault Gun Battalion records the diary of an unknown commander. The final entry, dated April 25, 1945, from Berlin reads, "We are holding a crossroads near the Reichstag. Ruins everywhere. 11 shells left. Fuel for 20 kilometers, there are 3 of us. France was wounded yesterday. We know we've lost, but we do our job because it's all we know. The StuG is our home, and we'll go with it to the end." Soviet soldiers found this vehicle on May 2nd, empty, the gun blown off, and 3 knocked-out T-34s beside it. The crew had vanished, presumably on foot when their fuel ran out. Stories like this explain the StuG's effectiveness better than any table. It wasn't just the machine. It was how it was used and how its crews believed in it. By 1946, the war was over. Germany lay in ruins. The factories in Berlin where StuGs were assembled were bombed out, including those of MEOG and Braunwag. Production ceased forever, but the idea survived. After studying the StuG, the Americans developed their own turretless systems, such as the M18 Hellcat, a fast tank destroyer, and the M36 Jackson, a heavy, self-propelled gun with a 90mm cannon. The principle was the same: low silhouette, powerful gun, and mobility. The Soviet Union created the Su-100, a turretless mount on the T-34 chassis with a 100mm gun. The British deployed the Archer and Achilles, anti-tank SPGs based on the Valentine and Sherman chassis. Even the French, after the war, built the ARL-40, and the Swiss developed the Panzerjäger G13, effectively a successor to the concept on the Panzer 38T chassis. The assault gun concept, first formulated by Manstein in 1936, became standard by the late 1950s, with nearly every army fielding turretless self-propelled guns. Cheaper, simpler and more effective in defense. What happened to the StuGs themselves? Some were scrapped or melted down by the Allies. Several hundred were handed to countries short on armor. Syria received 57 StuGs in the 1950s and used them in the Six-Day War of 1967 against Israel, with grim results. Modern Israeli guns easily destroyed the aging StuGs from long range. The StuGs era came to an end. Spain kept theirs into the 1960s, while the last StuGs were retired in 1970. In Italy, they lasted until the mid-50s, and in Yugoslavia, they were used until the 60s. The last StuG to see real combat was destroyed in Egypt during the Six-Day War in 1967. It was 24 years old. It outlived its army, its country, and its era. Today, roughly 30 operational StuGs remain worldwide, preserved as museum pieces in Kubinka, Bovington, Aberdeen, and Sinsheim. Each serves as a monument not to victory, Germany lost the war, and not to cruelty, though war is always cruel, but to an idea. Sometimes brains matter more than brawn. Sometimes it's better to be unseen than unbeatable. Sometimes a turretless vehicle beats a turreted tank. American engineers in 1944 understood this, albeit too late. But they did understand, and summed it up in a line that encapsulates the StuG's story. This vehicle was created for one mission and proved ideal for another. It was meant to be an infantry support gun and became the war's most effective tank destroyer. Not thanks to thick armor, but thanks to a low silhouette. And that is the chief lesson. In battle, the winner is not the one who is heaviest, but the one who is hardest to find. The StuG story is a paradox, built for one role, best at another. Considered secondary, it proved pivotal. Cheaper than a tank, simpler with thinner armor, yet it destroyed more enemies per own loss than any other German vehicle. Why? Because the Germans understood the ABCs of armored combat. Victory doesn't go to the thickest armor, but to the first shot. And to fire first, you must see earlier or remain unseen. The StuG's low silhouette is not a compromise. It's a philosophy. It's better to hide behind a crest than rely on armor. It's better to strike from ambush than charge head-on. It's better to live and fight another day than die a hero today. In 1943, the Americans did not yet understand this. They designed the Sherman as a mass-produced, reliable, all-purpose tank. taller for crew convenience, with a turret to fire in all directions and enough armor to absorb hits. The Sherman was a good tank, and it won the war. Not because it was technically the best, but because there were so many of them. For every StuG, the Americans had 5 Shermans. For every German round, a dozen of their own. This sheer quantity determined the strategy. But at the tactical level, the StuG won again and again. At Dilguetard, at Carentan, at Kursk, at Vitebsk, it could knock out 5 vehicles before suffering its own loss, and sometimes 10. Was the StuG perfect? No. The lack of a turret limited its firing arc. Its thinner sides made it vulnerable to flanking fire. The low hull created cramped quarters. The absence of a commander's cupola reduced situational awareness. Yet for its role, ambush, defense, and pinpoint strikes, it fit perfectly. That's why the Germans produced 10,000 StuGs, more than Tigers and Panthers combined. The StuG won more fights for less cost and with fewer losses. Today, when we look at a museum exhibit, a low, squat hull with a long gun, we don't feel the awe that a Tiger or Panther invokes. It's plain, functional, almost austere. But behind that simplicity lie thousands of dead Allied tankers, hundreds of burned Shermans, Cromwells and T-34s, dozens of shattered companies, and a hard lesson. In war, the winner is not always the strongest. Often, it is the smartest. The StuG forced the Americans to think differently, to rewrite their manuals, and to admit that a tank is not the only solution to a tank. It showed them that a turretless self-propelled gun could be more effective, that camouflage can matter more than armor, and that a low silhouette saves lives. It's no accident that after the war, the M18 Hellcat, M36 Jackson, and M56 Scorpion, different machines, all emerged from the same school. This is the StuG's legacy, a vehicle the Germans seemingly created by accident, yet one that the world would remember forever. Was the StuG the best fighting vehicle of the Second World War? It depends on how you measure it. By armor? No. By speed? Also no. By comfort? Definitely not. But by the ratio of enemies destroyed to its own losses? Perhaps. By ease of manufacture and repair? Yes. By its impact on the enemy's tactics? Unquestionably, yes. The StuG changed the rules of the game. It showed that form can outweigh sheer mass, and that geometry can defeat armored giants. The most terrifying enemy is the one you don't notice until it's too late. When American officers in 1943 stood beside the captured vehicle at Aberdeen Proving Ground, they couldn't believe that this low-profile vehicle had knocked out so many of their tanks. They searched for miracle armor or a secret gun. The secret was simple: 58 centimeter, the difference in height. That 58 centimeter meant the difference between life and death, between seeing first or not seeing at all. Do we understand that lesson today, in a world of ever heavier and more complex machines? Perhaps not. Time and again, we trade brains for brawn and brevity for bulk. The StuG reminds us that sometimes less is more, simpler is smarter, and the most effective weapon is the one the enemy doesn't detect until it fires. A low silhouette against thick armor, ambush against frontal attack, mind against muscle. The StuG chose the first and won thousands of fights. Do we remember this lesson? Do we apply it today? Do we accept that the most dangerous enemy is not always the largest, but often the least visible?